Hello, bullfrogs. All right, so we're going to finish our last two chapters of our number 11 book. And then tomorrow, actually, yeah, so this is Wednesday. So Thursday, we're going to start our newest book. It's this one. So I just want to give you a heads up so you can go find this one at the library or borrow it from someone or whatever. It is the number 12 book, and it is Eve of the Emperor Penguin. So, for those of you who love penguins out there, this will be a fun book for us to read. And now that our summer is really heating up, it'll be nice to imagine being in the cold weather like we see right there on the front cover. Okay, so go get number 12 and be ready to read that with me on Thursday. All right, so this is the last two chapters. Chapter 9 is called Think, Think. "Where's my backpack?" Jack yelled to Annie. "What?" Annie said. "My backpack," said Jack. "Don't worry about that now," said Annie. "We have to—" "The wand," Jack interrupted her. "Oh," said Annie, "the wand. We have to find my pack fast," said Jack. Jack and Annie pushed past the sailors crowding the railing. They ran across the deck. "Did you bring it in the rowboat?" yelled Annie. "Yes." "No, I don't know," said Jack. "I can't remember." "Think, think," said Annie. There's the title. That was it. Jack tried to think as they ran around the upper deck of the ship. Did I have it in the rowboat? What happened in the rowboat? I felt sick in the rowboat. I hugged my backpack in the rowboat. I remember, Jack shouted. I was holding on to it when we first came aboard. Then, "It's here somewhere," said Annie. "The wardroom." "Oh, the wardroom," said Jack. "Hurry," cried Annie. Jack and Annie raced down 2 flights of steps. They looked in the wardroom. Jack's pack wasn't there. "Henry's lab," said Annie. Yes, it's in there," Jack cried. "I remember now. I left it on the table. I put it down when I looked through the microscope." Jack and Annie ran up 1 flight of steps to Henry's lab. They tried to open the door, but it was locked. "We need Henry," said Jack. "We don't have time," said Annie. "We don't have a choice," said Jack. Jack and Annie charged back up the stairs to the upper deck. The crew was still gathered at the end of the deck, yelling and shrieking about the octopus. Henry was coming toward them. "Henry, help us," said Annie. She raced to Henry and grabbed him by the arm. She pulled him toward the stairs. "You have to unlock your lab. We have to get Jack's backpack. It's life or death. Hurry, hurry." "Why? Wait, what?" sputtered Henry. "We'll explain later," said Jack. "Just hurry," said Annie. Henry looked baffled, but he walked away quickly and led Jack and Annie down the stairs. They nearly pushed him across the hall toward his lab. The scientist pulled out his key and unlocked the door. Jack and Annie burst into the lab. "Yay!" said Annie. Jack's pack was on the table. Jack grabbed it and tore it open. He pulled out the wand of Dianthus. The silver spiraled wand gleamed in the dim light of the room. "What is that?" asked Henry. "We'll explain later," said Annie. "Come on, let's go back up," said Jack. "No, we don't have time," cried Annie. "Use it now, Jack. Say something now before they hurt him." Jack held up the wand. "5 words," said Annie. "I know," said Jack. But what 5 words? This was their only chance. "Hurry," said Annie. "I am," said Jack. "But we can't just save him this one time. We have to make sure the ship never ever tries to hurt him or others like him." Jack closed his eyes. He pictured the giant octopus, his umbrella-like body and long tentacles, the gaze of his yellow eyes, a gaze that had curiosity and shyness. So here's a picture of Jack holding the wand. Jack thought of the sheer wonder of the octopus's existence. The giant sea animal was incredibly amazing. He was like a miracle. Jack wished he and Annie could explain the miracle of the octopus to everyone, but No one would listen to them unless... Hurry, Jack, say the words, said Annie. Make them hear the truth. The words had burst out of Jack. What? Said Annie. Make them hear the truth, said Jack, his eyes still shut tight. That's my wish. Make all the guys upstairs hear the truth about the octopus. What are you talking about? Said Henry. What is that stick you're waving? Jack opened his eyes. He shook his head at Annie, but she didn't see him. It's a magic wand, Annie said to Henry. Actually, said Jack, trying to think of something else to say. Oh, yes, I see, said Henry. He smiled sadly. You're pretending, like children. We are children, said Annie. Come on, Jack, let's go tell them the truth. All right, so do you think that was a smart wish? He only had 5 words that he could say. Do you think that was a smart wish? Let's see. Chapter 10 is called The Heart of the Ocean. This is the last chapter. Jack put the wand back in his pack. Then he and Annie charged out of the lab with Henry behind them. The 3 of them climbed back up the stairs. When they stepped onto the top deck, they heard the sailors still shouting and yelling. Jack and Annie raced across the deck. They pushed through the crowd until they got to the railing. The octopus was still in the net, bright red and hiding his head in fear. The sailors had gathered weapons. Some were aiming harpoons. Others stood by with knives. Some pointed pistols. Stop! Cried Annie. Stand back, the captain yelled at her. You must bring it up alive, begged the professor. I beg you to let me examine it before you slay it, Captain. But before the captain could answer, someone hurled a harpoon at the creature. It missed and landed in the water with a splash. No, yelled Annie. Listen to us, Jack yelled in the loudest voice. You have to hear the truth. He stood up on the bottom rung of the ship's railing so everyone could hear him. Don't touch him, he shouted. He's not going to hurt you. He deserves to live peacefully in the sea. He's a miracle of nature. But no one was listening to Jack. No one even turned to look at him. Stop, hear us, said Annie. We speak the truth. Leave him alone. Remove the children, the captain roared again. Now! Tommy and Joe grabbed Jack and Annie. Let us go. We have to talk to them, yelled Annie, kicking and flailing. She and Jack broke loose from the sailors. She's right. They have to hear the truth, yelled Jack, running toward the railing. He's okay where he is. He's different from people, but he's a miracle. Again, no one seemed to hear him. The magic's not working, Annie cried to Jack. I know, said Jack. He was desperate. No one was hearing the truth. What was wrong? He and Annie had followed the rules. They were trying to help others, not themselves. They had tried their hardest first, and Jack had used only 5 words. Look, a sailor shrieked. Look at the monster. Jack and Annie looked back at the water. The giant octopus had uncovered his head and raised it out of the water. La! The sound was breathy and whispery, as if it came from the wind. The members of the crew lowered their weapons and stepped back in awe. It speaks, shouted a sailor. Me! The sound was wild and shrill, as if it came from a deep forest. Go! The sound was hollow and haunted, as if it came from an ancient gong or bell or drum. Home! The sound was unbearably sad, as if it came from the heart of the monster. I'm no monster! The octopus fell back into the water. All the seamen and scientists stared in wonder and terror. Then Annie's voice rang through the silence. Did you hear him? He said. Let me go home. I'm no monster. The crew looked at each other in shock. "That's what he said. I heard it," one man said. "Heard it with my own ears." "I heard it too," said another. "Me too," said another. "It's a sign," said a sailor. "We can't hurt 'em or any other like 'em," said another. All eyes turned to the captain. He stood still for a moment, staring down at the giant octopus in the net. The captain looked at the professor. The professor seemed stunned. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The captain looked at Jack and Annie. "Please hear him," Annie said. "He told you the truth." The captain stared at the octopus for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. "Free him," he said softly. The sailors slowly put down their harpoons, axes, pistols, and ropes. "Sir, I request permission to cut the creature from the net," Henry said to the captain. The captain nodded. "Permission granted, Mr. Mosley," said the captain. "Help me," Henry said to Jack and Annie. "Sure," said Jack. "We'll come too, mate," said Joe. Joe and Tommy hurried after Henry, Jack, and Annie to a row of small boats on the deck. The sailors lowered one of the boats down to the surface of the water. Then Jack, Annie, Joe, Tommy, and Henry all climbed down the ladder and stepped inside. Everyone else watched from the deck. Joe and Tommy rowed alongside of the ship until they came to the spot where the giant octopus was trapped. The two sailors held the boat steady with their oars. "Grab the net," Henry said to Jack and Annie. Jack reached out and grabbed a corner of the net. Annie helped him pull it out of the water. Henry used a big knife to slice through the thick rope strands. Even though the rowboat rocked violently, Jack didn't feel sick at all. Jack, Annie, and Henry pulled the torn net into the small boat. Jack kept staring at the octopus. He looked back at all of them with his great... I'm going to let you look at the picture before I finish that sentence. Here they are in the boat. They're letting him go. He looked back at all of them with his great eyes. His tentacles spread about him like a giant flower. His fierce red color had changed back to gray. "Goodbye, you," Annie said softly. "Go home now." The octopus lifted two of his tentacles as if to wave goodbye. Then he slipped under the surface of the water and vanished. Okay, there is a chapter 11. Chapter 11 is called Goodbye, Mates. Okay. Jack looked up. The captain, the professor, and the crew members were all gazing silently down at the water. Henry gave the captain a salute. The captain saluted back. Then everyone on board clapped and shouted. Overhead, the clouds had disappeared, as if a curtain had been pulled away from the sky. Pink and red swirls of light streaked the blue. The cheering died down. "Let us disturb these waters no more," commanded the captain. "Unfurl the sails. Get the steam up in the boilers." Henry turned to Jack and Annie. "While they prepare the ship, shall we return you to the shore?" he asked. "Yes, please," said Annie. Jack just nodded. He was totally exhausted as Joe and Tommy started rowing back toward land. The wind shifted and died down to a breeze. "I predict a fine, clear night tonight," said Tommy. "And tomorrow, too," said Joe. "The wind should be brisk." "A good time to sail," said Tommy. When they drew close to the shore, Tommy and Joe both jumped out of the boat, splashing through the shallows. They pulled the boat up and onto the beach. Jack and Annie hopped out. Henry climbed out after them. "Thanks," Jack said to the sailors. Henry walked with Annie and Jack up the dunes. "Are you sure you will be all right?" he asked. "What will you do when night comes on?" "Don't worry," said Jack. "We'll get back to our parents before dark." "Lucky you," Henry said wistfully. "I wish I could get back to my own family before dark." I hope you keep having a good voyage," said Annie. "And I hope you learn a lot," said Jack. "Bye." "Wait, before you go," said Henry. "I want to give you something." Henry reached into his pocket. of his vest and took out the beautiful nautilus shell. The real reason I ran into my lab when the storm came was to get this, he said. I didn't want to risk losing it, but now I would like to give it to you. Oh, no, Henry, you love it. You keep it, said Annie. I do love it, said Henry, but I want you two to have it. Today, you taught all of us an important lesson. It is a dark day in the deep sea when we cause innocent creatures to suffer. The professor said we can conquer our fears through knowledge, but you taught us that our fears can be best conquered through compassion. Even we scientists must never forget to have compassion for all living creatures. My compassion for the little creatures that once lived in the shell made me very happy. Oh man, thought Jack, that's the secret. Henry held out the gleaming nautilus shell, and Annie took it from him. Thanks, Henry, said Annie. We promise to take very good care of it. Thank you, said Henry. He brushed his hand across his eyes. Well, I must say goodbye now. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Henry saluted them. Before Jack and Annie could say anything, the scientist turned and walked briskly back to the rowboat. Let's go, Annie said. Jack and Annie walked around the dunes and headed through the seagrass to the rope ladder. Then they climbed back into the treehouse and looked out the window. The rowboat was gliding over the shimmering water of the sunlit sea, heading back to the HMS Challenger. Here's a picture of Jack and Annie saying goodbye and getting the shell. Goodbye, mates, said Jack. Our mission, said Annie, as if she just remembered. She looked at Jack. We didn't discover a secret of happiness. Yes, we did, said Jack with a smile. Henry said it, actually. A secret of happiness is having compassion for all living creatures. Compassion? Said Annie. Yeah, that means feeling sympathy and love for them, said Jack. Oh, sure, Annie said, matter-of-factly. Loving other creatures makes me really happy. I wonder why some people don't get that. I don't know, said Jack. Too bad they have to see a miracle first, like an octopus talking, said Annie. I know what you mean, said Jack. The octopus just being an octopus is the real miracle. Annie smiled. And Henry's seashell. The little creature inside, him too, she said. He was a miracle too. She held out the shining shell. Jack took the shell from her and carefully put it in his backpack. The shell will help us remember the secret, he said. I think we always knew it, said Annie. Henry just put it into words for us. Come on, let's go. Annie picked up the Pennsylvania book and turned to the picture of the Frog Creek woods. Let me go home, she said, repeating the strange sounds from the octopus. Jack smiled. He started to tell her to say it right, but before he could, the treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster, then everything was still, absolutely still. Soft raindrops pattered against the roof of the treehouse. I love being home, said Annie. Me too, said Jack with a sigh. Jack and Annie strapped on their bike helmets and pulled on their sneakers. Then Jack took their research book out of his pack and put it in their library books. All I want to do now is to go into our warm, dry house and see Mom and Dad, said Annie. Me too, said Jack. And read one of my new library books. And eat dinner, said Annie. A good dinner, said Jack. No stale biscuits or lime juice. He slipped on his backpack. And no pea soup. Pea soup? Asked Annie. But Jack had already started down the ladder. And then read a little more and climb into bed, he continued. A warm, dry bed in a warm, dry house, said Annie, following him. Yep, said Jack, stepping onto the ground. I guess the octopus just wanted to go home, too. Hey, I wonder if he has a name. Said Annie. She and Jack climbed on their bikes. I think his name might be Charles. That sounds right, said Jack, laughing. I wonder if Charles has an octopus wife and octopus kids. I bet he does, said Annie, and I bet he couldn't wait to get home and hold them in all 8 of his arms. Jack laughed again. Yeah, I bet you're right, he said. Then he and Annie took off riding through the Frog Creek woods. The rain fell harder, but it didn't matter. They were heading home. All right, that's the end of this awesome book. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to read this one. We'll start on Thursday, and we'll read this book, probably the first 2 or maybe 3 chapters. And this will be our 5th chapter book for the summer. Can y'all believe it? That's awesome. All right, well, I hope that you're working on your math facts. I hope that you're reading and maybe even doing a little bit of journaling about all the fun things you're doing this summer, and keeping your brain strong and healthy and ready to be in the 2nd grade for you bullfrogs that I just had this past year. And I hope that you are enjoying the last little bit of summer that we have. Teachers go back sooner than y'all do, so we don't have that much longer. But anyway, I look forward to starting a new book with y'all in a couple of days. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Keep reading. Bye.